Welcome to a very special live episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, November 3rd. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Purdue game in 3 days, the game against Michigan in 24 days. Joined by Tony Gerdeman here on the indoor facility at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Just got a chance to talk to Ohio State head coach Ryan Day, defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, and Ohio State starting quarterback Will Howard. So many different places we could start. I want to start. I headlined the show with the offensive lines. We're going to get there in a minute. But first of all, we got to start with the first question for Jim Knowles, which is where he got those dance moves. And I think my follow-up to that would be, what was his jam in the 1980s? That was not asked. So I need to know, Jim Knowles was really getting down during the postgame. What was Jim Knowles getting down to in the 1980s while he was a student at Cornell?
Well, he's a Philly guy, but a lot of Philly people are also kind of Jersey people. So maybe some Bon Jovi, maybe some Dancing in the Dark, Bruce Springsteen type of stuff. He said he was big. It was big in the 80s, his dance moves. So I'm thinking somewhere in that vein, slippery when wet type of stuff.
He was like the Courtney Cox to Bruce Springsteen.
I didn't want to say it, but that's a very apt analogy.
I do like the idea that you just put forth there, that Philadelphia is the poor man's New Jersey. Listen, people may not like it, but the truth is the truth.
Name a Philadelphia band. See?
Can't.
So you have to abscond with somebody else's other state's band.
Much like their most famous athlete, it's probably a fictional person from a movie, a fictional band from a movie.
There you go. Perfect.
I don't know. Was the band from Almost Famous or the band from That Thing You Do? They might have been from Philly. I don't know.
No, I believe they were from Indiana.
Well,
the Dead Milkmen are from Philadelphia.
The Dead Milkmen are from Philadelphia.
Well, all right.
Good job on that one.
R.I.P. to the Milkmen. Let's move on, Tony, to the actual. I know who the Dead Milkmen are.
Did you give the days countdown?
I did.
Okay.
3 and 24.
All right.
Yeah, don't worry. We're on it.
Kevin did say Boys to Men. So
okay. Well, Will Smith.
Do you think
DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince?
Right. So
Philadelphia.
You're saying, okay. All right. That's Jim Knowles' jam.
I'm really going to have to keep us on the rails here today because we will get booted out of here at some point. So, Tony, we got to talk a little bit about the offensive line because the offensive line, this time last week, I think we were thinking, could go a number of different directions. And once they pick their direction, it could go a whole bunch of different ways. They picked a direction. It went pretty darn well. 4 of the 5 guys graded out as champions. The only one who didn't was Taylor Shabola, and it sounded like he was pretty close.
Yeah, he was close, and as Ryan Day said, it's not a feel-good award. You've actually got to hit the grade, and 4 of the 5 did there. And talking about why they went with Hinzman, it's a lot of what we talked about last week. They went with experience and a tough environment, and it worked for them, and that's what they're going to be doing moving forward. Somebody asked, if Zen Mahalski comes back, what's the story there? It's like, we're going to stick with this because it's working. So as with anything, you stick with it until it doesn't work, and then you try something else. But they like the way things are going right now. Having reviewed the film, when you've got – when was the last time they had 4 offensive linemen grading out as a champion? They may have had it a couple of times in the non-conference, but to have that in that kind of environment, 2 players starting in new positions, nobody was expecting that from outside of this building, and I think very few were expecting it from inside the building.
I think there might have been a lot of people who were hoping inside the building, but I don't know that expecting is probably how they were approaching that. There are a lot of different interesting angles to this whole thing. I guess let's work from the outside of the line and work in. Donovan Jackson, I think it's fair to wonder how enthused Donovan Jackson was about kicking out to tackle. He's played his whole career at Ohio State at guard. This is a contract year for him. He is 4 games plus whatever postseason away from heading off to the NFL. So it's reasonable, with potentially a life-changing amount of money on the line, to wonder exactly how enthused he was about heading out to left tackle. But, he was obviously willing to do it, and it worked out pretty well for him.
Yeah, willing to do it. You sit him down, you say, this is a situation, and he knows the situation. So it's not like, well, this was just sprung on him.
This is the first I'm hearing of this.
Me? Tackle? What? He's practiced it a little bit. Ryan Day said he could be a good tackle. And you get through this one game, now you build on it. But as we've seen over the years, where if it is truly about the brotherhood, then you should be willing to play wherever. And we've talked to players who are corners and said, I'd be a nose tackle if they need me to. Wherever you need me, put me there. I'm going to do what I can. And that's what you've seen from Donovan Jackson. That's what you've seen from Carson Hinzman, coming in cold and really not looking like a seasoned veteran in this game. But Donovan Jackson, they helped him out when they could. Ryan Day said they did have to, do what they do and call plays and go from there. And a couple of those, Abdul Carter got the best of Donovan Jackson, but Abdul Carter is going to get the best of a lot of players and the quickness, and he was timing up the snap counts maybe and things like that. I think Ryan Day alluded to, but again, we've said it. The overall play from him there gives you a lot of hope for what is to come. And if you pass this test, the other tests are going to seem much easier.
Yeah, you have now. I mean, they talk all the time about practicing in during the week so that the games seem easy after practices. Mm-hmm. After going up against Abdul Carter, I don't know which Purdue defensive end or Northwestern defensive end.
Probably one of the Karloftises is.
Yeah. I don't know which of the many plate smashing Purdue defensive ends they might face this weekend, but you certainly going to be less difficult, presumably, than Abdul Carter. And also another week, a full week of practice for Donovan Jackson at tackle. Mm-hmm. He's worked there, but he hasn't been getting 50 reps every practice, even during fall camp. He worked there a little bit, but as Ryan Day said, it's practice during the fall when it's just sort of more of a theoretical exercise is very different than having to do it in a game. Now that he's had to do it in a game, and now that he has another week of practice, you would expect there to be a significant jump in his play. He's not going to turn into Orlando Pace overnight, but you should see a tangible improvement, I would think, this week, and then presumably next week, and then moving forward.
I would agree, because everything he was faced with was the least friendly debut you would want to make, and I think some of that is why maybe we didn't see this initially, just because maybe they didn't feel like there was enough time, and certainly you go into this situation where it's loud, you're going on a silent count, you're going up against potential All-American type. It's a new position. Like, he had everything against him, and he responded in a really, really big and confident way. And then after the game, we were both on the field. We saw the emotion from Donovan Jackson. He was, and the emotion that everybody else was outpouring to him. They were all very happy for him. He was fired up for that game and the way he performed. And now, as everybody said today, that is over. Mm-hmm. It's time to move on to Purdue.
Yep. And someone else who was pretty emotional on the field after the game was Carson Hinzman. He's had kind of a different journey. He also had to make a position switch. He's been working mostly at center pretty much all camp. He worked at guard some during fall camp, was also out with that virus that kind of went through the offensive line room for a bunch of August. He worked some at guard then. He worked, and they felt like Taylor Chabot was a better option back in August at guard, at that right guard spot. So then he went back to the backup center spot. And then it felt like we just kind of didn't hear about him anymore. He just kind of vanished for the first half of the season. And then, the reserves coming out in the middle of a battle, like, boy, when they really needed someone, there he was. And he's had a crazy journey from, the end of the Michigan game, and then he doesn't play in the Cotton Bowl, and then he's basically this forgotten man for the first half of the regular season.
Iron Buckeye over the offseason.
During the offseason, but then basically forgotten again for the first half of the regular season. And then when they absolutely positively had to have someone, they get this great performance out of him, out of the rest of the offensive line in one of the biggest moments of the season.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And the fact that I almost completely forgotten, because it's been so long, where it was Carson Hinzman and Taylor Chabot battling for that right guard spot. Mm-hmm. And you wonder what would happen if Carson would have been healthy throughout camp like Taylor was. Would it have gone a different way? But then it's like, well, then it's Austin Searveld and Taylor Chabot still rotating in at the right guard spot. It was like Carson Hinzman ceased to exist. And then last week start to hear things, and it's like, he looked pretty good. And he's a physical run blocker. He's an athletic pass blocker. That's why he was able to play center. They like athletes there. He's an athletic, big, powerful guy who seems to fit just perfectly with what they want to do right now.
And Ryan Day brought up something that we've talked about with Hinzman a bunch in the past, which is Hinzman started last year a year before they were really ready to have Hinzman start, because when Luke Whippler left, that caught everybody off guard, including the coaching staff. So they weren't really planning. They were planning on one more year of Luke Whippler and Hinzman taking another year to sort of apprentice and learn. And he just kind of got thrown into the fire last year and ended up doing a pretty solid job. So I guess it was not a huge surprise to see him thrown into the fire again and do a pretty solid job.
Well, wouldn't this be Luke Whippler's 5th year?
This would, yes, but I think you would assume you're getting 4 years out of Luke Whippler and not 5, probably.
Yeah. But it's still the development track was, as you said, is very accelerated. And we talked about this the entire time when he was a center. And there were games last year where you didn't notice him, and that's what you want. Mm-hmm. And funnily enough, there are times in this game where you did notice him, and that's exactly what you wanted as well.
Yeah, there were some big blocks, and they got some big push on that last drive. You mentioned earlier, hey, if you have a safety and you need to move them to nose tackle, well, the guys are willing to do that. Well, they don't need to do that because they have Caden McDonald, and they also have Edric Houston, 2 young guys who McDonald had a huge play on that goal line stop on that 3rd down right at the end of the game. So Edric Houston in there at 3-tech as well. It feels like both of those guys are on their way to potentially getting a bigger role on the defensive line.
Yeah, both Day and Knowles said they want to continue to play Caden McDonald more. I think everybody wants to see that, and they generally play him in some short yardage situations. I think you'd like to see him more in some, 2nd down situations as well, just to get Ty Hamilton out there. I'm going to assume we see quite a bit of him these next 2 weeks, but every time we start talking about and projecting how many snaps or plays the young guys are going to get, it's a 10-point game in the 4th quarter against whatever. But him and then Edric Houston, who came in as a 5-star defensive end. And we saw him playing kind of in the rushman package inside, and then Foley playing as a 3-tech and just regular base personnel. And Ryan Day said that he's moved there. Doesn't mean he's going to be there forever, but they like him there. They like the explosion, and Edric Houston has embraced this. He has seen the potential where you take his athleticism and his size and you move it inside, and everything kind of just increases a little bit more in terms of the matchups that you're faced with. And we know Larry Johnson loves having that pass rushing defensive tackle at 3-tech, who was a former defensive end. We've seen it years and years and years. Draymond Jones would be a fairly good example of somebody who starts out as a defensive end and then grows into that tackle, and then by year 2 is really making plays. And so I think it's good because he's kind of been a forgotten guy with the defensive ends that they have, and they're still struggling to get Mitchell Melton on the field as much as people would like to see, and certainly Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson. So to now have a guy like Edric Houston, who was the first guy in when Tyleik Williams went down, that is a neon sign as to how they feel about him.
Yeah, and Tyleik Williams, there was an update on his status, and it was, this was not the most informative update. It was not the most detailed update. It was kind of day to day. We'll see how he does during practice on Tuesday, because they have not had like the, Tuesday, Bloody Tuesday kind of practice. Tuesday and Wednesday are the days they really go very hard. And they are practicing today. They have a 2:30 team meeting and then a practice. There have been years in the past where they have not practiced on Election Day. They're practicing this year. So we'll see how Tyleik Williams goes. As soon as I hear day-to-day on a Tuesday with a veteran guy in a game where Ohio State's favored by like 7 touchdowns, I go, all right, we'll see at Wrigley Field. That's kind of where, and we'll see it. We'll see if we see it at Wrigley Field. The fact that he's, we saw him up running. He was kind of jogging on the sidelines after that, because he went down and it was like, oh boy, that might be real bad. And then he got up and was, jogging on the sidelines, was okay. Presumably could go if necessary this weekend. We'll see if that's what it ends up being the case.
If they don't, do you just slide Ty Hamilton over and put Caden McDonald at nose? I mean, is that
yeah, maybe?
Or do you go with Edric Houston, or do you go with Jason Moore? Do you go with Hero Canoe?
I think the answer to that to a certain degree is yes. Okay. Because if you're, if this is a game where you're favored by 7 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns, you can probably get a little creative, and if you win by 3 touchdowns instead of 5 touchdowns, it's not the end of the world. Despite what you may read online, it may not in fact be the end of the world if they win by 3 touchdowns instead of 5 touchdowns. But if you've got a guy like Edric Houston, I'm like, this is a game where you should play him. Let's see what you got with Jason Moore. Let's see what you got with Hero Canoe. They had
Will Smith.
Hero Canoe was out there in I think on that fourth down play, Caden McDonald's out there like third down, fourth down play. You saw Edric Houston in the fourth quarter of that game. If they can trust you to play on the road at Penn State in the fourth quarter in a one-score game, they can trust you to play in the first quarter against Purdue, regardless. I mean, right? But all that said, Ryan Day is saying all the right things about Purdue and not taking this game for granted and not still being, not having the people in this building still be thinking about the Penn State game.
Yeah, well, you're coming off of this game, the emotional high. You came off the Oregon loss, emotional low, and they were flat. No, they couldn't be flat. They knew they couldn't be flat. You come in high on this one. They need to manage their emotions better and their motivations better. And you would hope that they've come back to earth a little bit, because Ryan Day was very adamant. Like, if they think they're just going to go out there and beat Purdue, like that's not how it's going to happen. Teams are better than their record shows, which all coaches know is the truth. But you have to manage emotions better, Tom. I like to say you've got to play with emotion. You can't let emotions play with you. I'm the only person that says that. But you want them to be ramped up, but also this is an entirely new game. Like, you can't win this one by winning that one. You got to win this one by winning this one.
And I think when I think of the week after Penn State, I always think of 2017. Ohio State has that dramatic comeback in the fourth quarter over Penn State. JT Barrett goes 16 for 16 or whatever it is. Everyone's going nuts. What an incredible win, signature moment. And then the next week they went to Iowa City. How did it go? Well, Brian Ferentz scored more points in one afternoon than he did in seemingly some months in recent seasons.
The last 3 seasons.
Yeah. And I just was looking up, what week was the Purdue game in 2018? That was the week after the Minnesota game. So I don't think that was an emotional hangover as much as I believe the technical term is poopy defense. But either way, no. So, I'm not anticipating this being Purdue comes in and upsets Ohio State. They're not playing in West Lafayette, and Purdue and Iowa very similar in that playing them at home is very different than playing them on the road, where their stadiums are haunted. Will Howard, got a chance to talk to him as well. Before we move on to Will Howard, I do want to touch on one thing with Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles was asked about, this is something Ross Fulton has talked about a bunch. It seems like Jim Knowles is getting back more into the Jim Knowles defense from Oklahoma State over the last couple of weeks. Ryan Day talked about basically stripping it down to the studs after the Oregon game in terms of the defense and figuring out what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it, really starting from scratch. It feels like they're back to more of the Jim Knowles defense rather than whatever the sort of, the kids would call it a collab before, the Jim Knowles X whoever collab that they rolled out in Oregon. This feels like this is more Jim Knowles getting back to doing what Jim Knowles does best.
Yeah, but as Ryan Day said, it's not like a dramatic change. They've just stripped some of the stuff and gone back to what Knowles likes to do, what works for him. And you've seen the results, and I think they'll continue to do that. And in talking with Knowles and Jim Knowles and watching his answers, it feels like this has been, feels a long time coming for him to kind of be empowered to do this sort of thing, where Day comes in, gives some feedback and listens and sees how things are going. And now you're seeing him get back, and he's not being too, Knowles is like, are you doing more of what you did at Oklahoma State? And he's like, yeah, you could say that. And
did he smile when he said it?
Yes, he did. Then I asked him about the Nick Saban talking about how Ohio State's, after the Oregon loss, the 4-man rush being antiquated, and he said, well, I didn't see that. I don't read, I don't watch. And then I explained to him what he said, and there's kind of a smile, and then the quote was, he knows what he's talking about. You can't argue with his success.
You would not be wise to take the side opposite Nick Saban all that often, I would not think. So, yeah, that was Jim Knowles. Will Howard came in. First thing he talked about was he was wearing a sweatshirt from Buckeye Thon, which is like a dance marathon thing for cancer research. Penn State sort of did this, I think, originally, or has the biggest one in the nation.
They're insane.
And yeah, raise millions of dollars a year. It's a fantastic charitable event. Ohio State has kind of picked that up over the last decade or two and started to make that a little bit of a thing. But Will Howard is wearing a sweatshirt autographed by cancer patients that he went to go meet. And just, Will Howard just seems like such a likable kid. Like it just, I think, I'm sure after the pick six or after the fumble at the goal line, I'm sure there was a little grumbling, but man, he feels like such a likable kid. He was also asked about that last play, and yeah, you slid.
Mm-hmm.
And, winning the game is cool, but you know what would have been even cooler? Going for a touchdown on that play. He had a great response, and I think a good perspective on this is why you do this.
Yeah, he said you think about it, and you see that grass, and then he was like, maybe I could have padded my stats a little bit and grabbed some more, but you just want to get the win. You want to get down and be done with it. You don't want anything crazy to happen. And he referenced something crazy happening like last year, but we've seen. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's an Ohio State meme that is why boom, no take knee. Like Boom Herron scoring a touchdown against Texas in the bowl game. If he would have just slid down at the 3-yard line or whatever, they would have been able to milk the clock and kick a field goal and win that game. Instead, you score too early and you give the ball back. And Ohio State had no intentions of ever giving that ball back. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't going to be because Will Howard went 45 yards or whatever for a touchdown. He got down with plenty of time on the clock, but only needed to do one more play and it was done. So we know he has the wheels to go the distance. He also has the brain to know when not to.
Well, Tony, we start with Jim Knowles getting down. We end with Will Howard getting down. So that means it must be time to get some viewer questions.
To get down?
Listen, we'll see how many viewer questions we have, and if we have time for it.
What's the super chat for that?
Speaking of getting down, Lisa Sims, go Buckeyes. That video after the game was awesome. Love seeing the team celebrate and being able to release some pressure and tension.
Well, I think, Lisa talking about the last week, the end of the game, the video in the locker room, and mm-hmm. Just the stuff we saw on the field, and then in the locker room, the pressure, the tension. The pressure in this building was higher than usual last week. And we can usually tell just talking to Ryan Day. Ryan Day was back to Ryan Day this week. Ryan Day was a pressure cooker last week. And you felt like you saw that. You've seen that a couple times with him, like the Notre Dame game last year. Mm-hmm. After that, you sort of saw the release valve kind of blow on the pressure cooker a little bit. Sort of the same thing after that Penn State game.
Yeah, it shows just how much pressure was on all of them and how much they had felt it, and then they didn't have to feel it anymore for a couple of weeks. You got
assuming they don't give up a touchdown to Purdue.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they try to put a mask on and say, it's just one game, it's just this, it's just that, and we even talked about it before the game. The playoffs are still there for them, even if they lose, but it's really it's impossible not to know what people are going to be saying and thinking and what your circumstances are with the loss there. So it wasn't just, gosh, people are going to say mean things about us.
Right.
It was, now we no longer control our own destiny. And so you're leaving it in the hands of others. And you used to probably have a pretty good chance of making the playoffs regardless. But now this gets closer to that leave no doubt aspect of the game that Ryan Day is trying to preach.
Next
one is from No Longer the Man. That was one of the better press conferences I've seen from Ryan Day.
It went 35 minutes or so. I mean, he was plenty to talk about. When there's a lot of stuff to talk about, things can go pretty well. And it wasn't necessarily any short answers or stuff that he didn't want to talk about. That's kind of how it goes after wins.
Yeah, it's kind of how it goes after wins, but it's how it goes after wins where they're happy with how things went, and they also have a winnable game or two on deck where it's not, hey, you've got Penn State and then Indiana's coming into town this weekend. You got a couple weeks where you're going to be a multi-touchdown favorite before you have another. I'm about to say the phrase matchup game against Indiana, and I'm not sure how I feel about that emotionally or academically, but here we are.
Say in Pig Latin, it would make more sense.
That is that's sort of like Ryan Day returning to normal. Like the cabin has been unpressurized. You're back down at you've landed at the airport. They've depressurized the cabin, and everyone has yawned and popped their ears, and you're sort of back to normal now.
Making fists with your feet on the carpet, like John McClane.
Troy V, if we do end up winning it all. We'll look back to Penn State as the week that we turned the corner and became a team.
I mean, if Ohio State does win it all this year, I mean, that's certainly the week that they probably more or less punch their ticket to the college football playoff. And, there's always an opportunity to, if they lose the Big Ten championship game by 17 points to Oregon, well, then you're going to have another turning point at some point later. But if they run the table, it feels like that goal line stand. I thought during the Nebraska game, they had a goal line stand, and I thought, here it is. That's the moment that everything changes. And then they went and fiddle-farted around, and that was not the moment everything changed. If they run the table here on out, and there's a lot of hurdles to clear before we get to the point where we're talking about that as a done deal, that goal line stand against Penn State, and then asserting their will and running out the clock. I mean, Ryan Day talked about how meaningful that was, that's not the norm.
Well, and Will Howard talking about picking up the 4 or 5 yards on the first sneak out of the goal line. He said this is something I noticed, we all noticed, I think, but you could tell, like, at that point, Penn State no longer thought they were going to be able to stop the run. And watching it live, it felt like the confidence that Ohio State had, the offensive line, you saw how fired up they were, you saw how fired up the running backs, the way they were blocking. Like, all of the momentum at that point was with Ohio State, which is crazy to say because they're backed up against the student section. Everybody knows what's coming. It's going to be a run. You just don't know exactly where. And the offensive line, the running backs, Will Howard, they didn't care. And they asserted their will, and you saw Penn State bend to it. And that just builds the confidence even more, takes the confidence down from Penn State. And it's just like the self-fulfilling prophecy as long as the execution is there.
Well, you know what they say, Tony.
Yeah.
When it comes to Ohio State quarterbacks, where there's a
no, Kevin.
There's a way.
Nope.
Jim Stewart, it's a down year in college football this year. Ohio State may steal a national championship. Why not?
Well, is it a down year in college football? I mean, I think I look at the 4 teams that were in the playoff last year, and I think that was a down year. This is a balanced year. I'd be interested once the season's done to go back and look at the SP plus numbers and just sort of compare year to year, the top of the sport versus the middle of the sport and where that separation is. I still think there's a certain amount of separation between the top 4 teams in the sport: Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, in some order. I know that's not the top 4 in the AP poll, but hear me out. Miami might not be able to fluke their way through an entire season of AC. They might also stop playing ACC teams at some point. It seems to me like there is still a little bit of a separation. We'll see. It's probably too early to say for sure, but Ohio State's only loss was to Oregon, who was part of that group. Oregon hasn't lost. Georgia lost to Alabama, but beat Texas. Texas has only lost to Georgia. I mean, you're really those 4 teams have one loss outside of that group, and it was Georgia losing a close game where they had a bad half. Really, outside of that group, Georgia has had a bad half, and that's it. So we'll see. I think it's a little soon to say for sure that this is a down year. The one thing that I do think is interesting is all the teams that have historically been terrible, Indiana and Vanderbilt and SMU, a lot of those teams, it's been a lot of, Indiana has done it through the transfer portal. Vanderbilt has done it through the transfer portal. I know the transfer portal has certainly helped out Michigan in recent years, Ohio State this year. It's helped out the top teams at the top of the sport. But man, if you do it right, you can lift yourself from the 50s to the 20s or even the 10s. And boy, that's really been pretty cool for the sport on the whole.
Yeah, and if you don't do it or you don't do it right,
they don't let you vote in South Carolina.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's a Dabo Swinney thing. That's not just
bad day, Tom.
Yeah. Sorry.
No,
sorry.
But like Michigan not going and getting a Curtis Rourke like Indiana did.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the one of the differences now. They brought a bunch of guys from James Madison as well.
Is Chris Cignetti coaching Michigan? No.
So that is also probably an issue. But no, I think last year was a down year. This year, just because there's a bunch of teams that can win it doesn't mean it's not still going to come from the same pool. And then Michigan, Washington, look how far they've fallen. I understand they lost their coach, but they lost a bunch of talent as well. And I think that's more proof that last year was not a great year overall.
Lisa Sims, was the O-line improvement due to Chip Kelly or Justin Fry?
Was the offensive line's improvement due to Justin Fry or Chip Kelly? I think it's a collaborative effort.
Players.
Yeah, I mean, I think the having a couple veteran guys out there who have played before, Zen Mahalski got kind of thrown into a tough spot, and having a couple veteran guys who've been out there before, who've been in the strength and conditioning program, who've started for a year or multiple years, who've played in those tough environments. I think that all goes into part of it. The Chip Kelly run scheme. I mean, I did a whole show with Ross Fulton that our members can watch already. That certainly factors into it too.
Yeah, I think they're all contributing. And a lot of times, and I'm not saying Lisa's doing this, a lot of times people are looking to take credit away from one coach because they don't like that coach. I think you got Tim Drevno in there as well helping, Mike Seleni helping. So it's everybody, but also I think Chip Kelly deserves every bit of credit that people want to give him, but that doesn't mean other people don't also deserve credit.
Yeah, no, I think the conversation around Justin Fry right now is very different than the conversation was around Justin Fry a week ago. So let's get one more. Okay, we're good. All right, well, we're good. So thank you guys all for joining us. If you have not hit the thumbs up button, please do that. It will help other folks find this show. Also, make sure you are subscribed to our channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Hit that bell. We are going to have a live college football playoff rankings reveal reaction show coming up 6:50 p.m. this evening. Nothing else going on, so just clear the decks. We're going to be talking Ohio State and the college football playoff ranking show, run through where all these, where teams slot in, what the path to the national championship could look like for Ohio State and for Oregon and for Texas and for Georgia and for everyone else. That'll all be coming up tonight, 6:50 p.m. youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.